Umi is going to be reading next. Thank you so much.
Hello. This story, my story is, it's based on the true story of my mother's cousin. And in the story there's a line that I may or may not read that says, many years later, his cousin described him this way. The character in the story is not here, but the cousin is here. My mother here, Lealoha Apple Perkins, who I just found out was published in Hawaii Review in 1989 when I was graduated from high school. So you find out the real name at the end, but the names have been partially changed to protect the partially innocent. The breach. Spring 1952. The letter in the mail was thick, addressed in pica type to Charles A. Makekau. The envelope read, Harvard University, Veritas, in crimson, and was postmarked Cambridge, Mass. 02138. He'd been waiting all day, every day over spring break, doing nothing else. His heart pounded so hard, he was sure his Japanese neighbors could see it beating in his chest. Back in the house, Charlie took his mother's stainless steel letter opener and delicately sliced open the envelope. Careful not to make any tears. The letter on fine parchment began, Welcome to the Harvard class of 1956. The next day, feeling good, Charlie regarded himself in the mirror. He thought he looked Chinese with Hawaiian coloring and lips. His jet black hair was slicked back and to the side. The overall effect was handsome enough. He looked at his body. His stomach was flat from youth, but soft from indulgence and frailty. He thought of a girl he would see in Smith Library. Something welled up in him, but he fought it off. He took a dress shirt off a hanger. He was appalled that men had recently started wearing florid blouses. He liked his shirts crisp and lily white. In the last days of high school, he seemed to form an unspoken bond with the two boys who were going to Stanford, Jerry Kamoku and Randall Ho'oki'i. The popular boys gave him big grins and raised their chins toward him as they passed in the hallways of Taki and Bishop Hall, as if to say, you're one of us. But they were athletes going on baseball and track scholarships. Charlie was no athlete, nor was he on scholarship. He was going on brains, paying full tuition. But all agreed that he was bound to be one of those success stories, a doctor in the new Honolulu, where racial boundaries were just beginning to loosen. Fall 1952. Charlie boarded the clipper ship. Gaining speed along the water of Ke'ehi Lagoon, chopping seas and the pontoons lifted off the lightly rippled sea. He crossed the vast expanse of the Pacific. How could Hawaii be part of America if this separated it? It seemed endless, but he would come to know that it separated his home from another realm entirely, another world, not just far away, but alien. A week later, Charlie got off a train in New York and took a bus to Boston. The campus straddled the Charles River, the first river he'd seen up close. Old but stately red brick buildings made the skyline jagged in a way not entirely different, he thought, from the way it might have looked in the 17th century. But the historic buildings were flanked and juxtaposed by Harvard Square, a modeled, steamy, miniature version of the more literate sections of Manhattan. He checked into Eliot House. The common room had a grand piano. His suite had a Persian-style rug and a fireplace. His new roommates walked in gleefully, quickly pausing, seemingly taken aback by his appearance, and just as quickly seeming to decide that they would like him. Hey buddy, I'm Alfred. Al. Harvey. I'm Charlie, he said, and he shook their hands, holiday style, and a grin slowly appeared on his face, mirroring theirs. They were from Brooklyn and Long Island and had both gone to school in New Hampshire, at Exeter and St. Paul's. Harv Shapiro was the first Jew Charlie had ever met. After an impossibly short time, Al said, we've got to do something about your clothes. They went to Brooks Brothers and got him fitted. He was dipping into monies he shouldn't have this early in the year, but it was worth it. He would write to Mom for more. After the measurements were taken and the suits ordered, Harv said, now to John Harvard's, and there was no refusing him. Charlie spent far more than he meant to on whiskey and beer that day. This became a Friday ritual. There were two other boys from Hawaii at Harvard, but they were from Punahou. He ran into one of them, Howard Brigham, at a finals club called The Fly. The young men there wore robes, smoked cigars, played pool, and acted like kings. Charles, isn't it? From Cam School? Charlie. Howard was with a group of other boys, and one of them said, "So you're from Hawaii, eh?" Another said, "By the way, how are ya?" His laugh excluded Charlie. Howard laughed nervously. These Punahou boys were conflicted mavericks who rebelled against their families by not going to Yale. Noblesse oblige required them to be cordial to a Hawaiian, but networking meant sticking with the Blue Book families their grandfathers had met while lobbying for Hawaii's annexation. The Kama'aina families cherished these connections above almost all else. When he told Alan Harv of the encounter with Howard, Harv said, "Forget those goy snobs." Al said, "Right. Besides, you're almost there, Charlie." Where he almost was, he knew and knew not. The next time Charlie saw him, Howard looked at him without recognition. Charlie began to speak out in class about the inequities of life in Hawaii and Puerto Rico, where they had taxation without representation. He even mentioned the unlikely rise of John Burns, a cop-turned-politician. Actually, he had lost every race so far, and how he had called Hawaii's system one of economic strangulation. He told the story of Joseph Kahahawai and the Massey case, and how honor killings still took place in America's fringes. His classmates from Connecticut and Newport downplayed his protest as anecdotal, not representative of American political life. But how could they know what life was like on the edge of American empire? How his hard-scrabble Portuguese friends from small kid time, like Skippy Gomes, scratched out a living as newspaper boys in Ka'ulubela, their skin becoming wrinkled at 11 or 12. Yet he was covetous of these scions of the East Coast establishment families. While he championed the Ka'ulubela boys, he grew unrecognizable and unintelligible to them, the last trace of pigeon draining from his speech into the gutters of Harvard Square. He got a D on a zoology test, and he left the class feeling as if life was ending. When he complained to his classmates about his difficulties in science classes, they tried to reassure him. Small fish, big pond, all of that, old boy. They were both business majors and had no academic troubles that would matter. They would go effortlessly on to Wall Street and summer in the Berkshires or on the Cape. Spring 1953. For the first time, he began to procrastinate. He erratically read philosophy, Descartes, Mill, Kant, in no order, with no plan, and when they weren't assigned. It did help in barroom conversations to drop a philosopher's name. The ritual at John Harvard's now included Wednesdays and Saturdays. Kierkegaard claims made people think he was deep and erudite, and they began calling him Charlie the Barstool philosopher, which gave him a certain perverse pride. It also made him feel phony, like the characters he'd heard about in Catcher in the Rye. He'd stumble home in the snow over the rough, uneven brick sidewalks, centuries old, questioning his own integrity aloud in front of Harv and Al, who gave each other significant looks over his stooped shoulders. He bought a record player, and listening to music became an activity, not just background. Jazz was a revelation, especially this new jazzman, John Coltrane. Charlie was thrilled to think Coltrane had been stationed in Hawaii and made his first recording there. He felt sure that Coltrane had listened to the Kamehameha Song Contest in '46. Everyone in Honolulu huddled around their radios in those days to hear the classes compete on the Friday before spring break. How different his music was from those predictable songs, every song ending in Ha'ina ia mai with no bridge or refrain. His roommates found Coltrane repetitive, but Charlie felt that in playing two adjacent notes over and over, back and forth, he was looking for the space between them. When A Love Supreme came out, it was obvious that his playing was a spiritual practice, and Charlie wondered that if that space between the notes was, for Coltrane, where God resided. He began to work in the Elliott House gardens, though he'd shown no inclination toward plants before. He was now taking botany, but it seemed to bear no relation to real practice. He even learned how to weed the flowers and get the dead material off, revealing the fresh plant beneath, casting off the chaff. The dead wood was tossed to the side of the building, forgotten. All this was to avoid his chemistry work, and it tore at his insides like a spade. Summer 1953. It took a week to make the trip, cutting his summer short on both ends. On the road had come out, and he thought of his cross-country train ride as a Kerouacian misventure. He was far too timid to hitchhike or even drive. America stretched out in its endless sameness, except for the Rockies in California, where vistas were breathtaking compared to his truncated Ireland world. America wasn't really states, he realized, but regions: the green and rocky East, the brown flat Midwest, the gray Western Plains. But the Pacific, what was once simply endless, now began to feel more like home in Cambridge or Honolulu. The breach, he called it. He felt he was crossing seas and centuries. He wasn't entirely comfortable in his skin or his suit in the East or in the islands, but here, in this space that America claimed to bridge, but he knew could not, nothing rolled up, nor needed to be fought back. Many years later, his cousin recalled that at family gatherings in the heat, Charlie had worn his Brooks Brothers suit, a felt hat, and carried a walking stick. Before Christmas, Charlie asked Al to drive him to the train station, since his trunk would be hard to take on the T with all his new clothes. Al demurred, making a lame and transparent excuse about his sister, who Charlie knew was at Wellesley and had her own car. Charlie felt an overwhelming nausea that was a kind of revulsion at the thought that everyone, despite all the buddy and the hey pal, was entirely out for themselves. It started at the bridge of his nose and sank to his stomach and made him feel seasick. He found it hard to breathe. It dawned on him that he'd been a project, one Al had now given up on. He felt that he would never be there, and everyone else had known it all along.